only here to do one thing, and that is to say, silence your phones, please. You don't want to be caught out at this event with a chirping, buzzing, screaming cell phone interrupting our speakers. This event will be moderated by someone who needs no introduction at Glucksman, Ireland House. That's Loretta Glucksman. Loretta.
Thank you, John. Thank you all very much. We're going to stay seated, except each of the panelists, when they are making their presentation, may take the podium. I think you might be more comfortable because of your PowerPoint, but it's totally up to you. We're not. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
So welcome. This is one of my favorite events, and I was saying to Nick, was it last year or 2 years ago when you were here and did an economic forum, and he tried to quietly remind me that it was 3 years ago. Time flies when you're having fun, and we do have fun in this wonderful little place. So I think it's an incredibly appropriate time to talk about the economy, particularly in the world, obviously, but Eamon can speak, as he shall, to the Irish economy, and Nick can speak to the world economy with a very interesting view to Greece. I don't know if we're going to get into that at all tonight. We had a very interesting sidebar conversation downstairs just previously. So there's a lot to think about, and with these two thought leaders to guide us through it, I think we will be the beneficiaries. I don't think either of these men need much introduction. Oh, and I'd like to make a special welcome to Carol Haney, who is Mrs. Eamon Gilmore, and she's come along from Ireland, and you're very, very welcome, Carol, always in Ireland. Eamon Gilmore was Tánaiste in what I think is one of the most successful coalition governments in Ireland in recent history. Eamon and the government saw Ireland through a very precarious economic difficulty. And we know that Ireland made very good progress through that, and I do give the government a lot of credit. Eamon is not an economist by training, but he is certainly a participant in a lot of important economic issues, particularly dealing with the IMF through the negotiations to have Ireland come out of the tailspin we were in and to stabilize, which I do believe Ireland is reaching, and I think your government deserves a lot of credit for it. Nicholas Economides, I mean, what else could he be? I sort of said to, I think it was to Anne, what would your parents have said if you had turned out to be a physicist or something? But we're glad you settled on the economy. Nick's specialization is something called network economies. And I have a vague, I'm like Sophie, I have a vague idea what that means, but not exactly. But his influence and his interest is much wider. He's an advisor to many countries and has been to Ireland. He was educated at Berkeley and at the London School of Economics. Oh, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that Eamon Gilmore is a product of the University of Galway. Go Galway. So two very erudite men coming tonight to talk with us about the state of the world economy and just to brighten our interest. So I would ask Eamon to first start, and again, Eamon, if you're more comfortable at the podium, whatever you choose.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Loretta, for the introduction and for hosting and comparing this event. And thank you also for all that you do and you have done for Ireland over the years. You're not just a friend to Ireland. I think we regard you as something of a guardian angel, and thank you for that. It's a great pleasure to be here at Glucksman House, which has made such a contribution to Irish studies here in the United States. And of course, at every event, there are people we meet here haven't seen for a while. One of the people I met is Professor Luke Gibbons. Luke was my first tutor in university, and he reminded me on the way in that I still owe him an essay on pre-Socratic philosophy. So, this might be a bad time to give you that essay. Now that I think of it. Where does one start with a topic like, where are we? From bailout to recovery, the prospects for the Irish and European economies, and probably more importantly, when would one finish talking about that? The day I started preparing my thoughts for this evening's event was a couple of weeks ago, and the headline on the Irish Times that day was "Tax returns confirm growth ahead of expectations." And I thought that's not a bad place to start, because it was a story about the first quarter exchequer returns for 2015. They showed that tax returns were 545 million ahead of what had been targeted. Across all levels of tax, income tax was up because more people are working. Sales taxes are up because more people are buying more, and taxes on related to property and share transactions are up because there's more economic activity. And as well as that, expenditure was down because more people at work, less being paid on social welfare. And it's one of the many good stories, good news stories, that we have been seeing over the past 2 years really, since Ireland exited the IMF EU ECB programme in 2013. And I thought what a remarkable contrast it was to the kind of story that we had when I came here 4 years ago as Tánaiste Minister for Foreign Affairs, representing the Irish government in New York for the St. Patrick's Day events. And the stories then about Ireland were very different indeed. This hungry old horse in a ghost housing estate, it seemed to me featured on virtually every story in an international newspaper about Ireland at that time. This particular one was actually in the New York Times on the 1st of January 2011 with an article by Suzanne Daly, who's remarked that everywhere she went there were abandoned housing projects rotting and waist-high weeds sprouting. At that time, our banks were collapsing. The state had guaranteed them. The state could no longer afford the guarantee. Unemployment was at about 15% and heading for 20%. We were spending 10 euros for every 7 that we were taking in taxation. Our reputation was in serious trouble. We were regarded at that time as one of the pigs. Portugal, Ireland, Greece and Spain. And the more polite people in the European environment used to say that we were the peripheral economies, and I think they meant peripheral in more senses than just geography. So our difficulty at that time, 4 years ago, was how to turn that around. And turn it around we did. We moved from a situation where at the height of the recession, the Irish economy was contracting, contraction of 6.37% in 2009. Last year, economic growth of 4.8% of GDP, fastest growing economy in Europe. Our budget deficit at its height was over 14% in 2010. The European Union requirement is that you get it under 3%. It will be under 3% comfortably next year, 2.7% budget deficit. We were effectively locked out of the international money markets in 2011. The 10-year bond yield rose to almost 12.5% in 2011. Currently it's around 1%. Unemployment rose to 15.1%. It's still officially 10%, but it's actually, we expect that the April figures will take it under the 10% for the first time. How did we do that? Well, with great difficulty, with considerable pain. There was certainly a lot of pain for people in Ireland, particularly people who lost jobs, people who had their incomes reduced. We had to make some very difficult decisions. But we also had a great deal of help. And in particular, I want to acknowledge the help that we got from this side of the Atlantic, the help that we got here in the United States. I remember being on a cold February, getting my photograph taken on Washington Square with the Taoiseach before an event which was hosted by President Bill Clinton in New York University to encourage American investors to invest in Ireland, many of whom in fact did. The plan that we worked to get out of the economic hole that we inherited was first of all to restructure and recapitalise our banks, because no functioning economy can function without a banking system. It cost the Irish taxpayers 64 billion euros. It's a lot of money. Now, some of that we get back for a variety of reasons, which I'm quite happy to go into, but it was a big price to pay for the restructuring and recapitalising of the bank. We had to make a 20% of GDP adjustment in our public finances, in our budget. There is no easy way to do that. We've had to introduce new taxes on property, increase taxes. We've had to also reduce public expenditure across a range of areas. And there is no easy way or no popular way in which that kind of adjustment can be made. We decided to renegotiate, to work the bailout that we inherited, but to try to renegotiate significant elements of it. We negotiated arrangements, for example, for the reduction of the interest rate which was being paid on it, for the extension of the maturities on the loans, which would reduce the burden, and for flexibility in the programme itself, which enabled us to do things that would help the economy and help move things forward. One of the things, for example, that we successfully negotiated was a negotiation down of the requirement in the programme for the sale of state assets. The original programme had a very high commitment to sale of state assets. We reduced that and also secured agreement with the international organisations to use the proceeds of the sale of state assets for reinvestment in the economy. We successfully exited the bailout at the end of 2013 without the necessity for a precautionary programme, which is normally required by the IMF. We had to restore our reputation. One of the most satisfying things that I remember on the week that I left office as Minister for Foreign Affairs was the publication by a political scientist called Simon Anholt of what he called the Good Country Index. And the Good Country Index, the outcome of the Good Country Index was he concluded that the goodest country in the world was Ireland. And he made the distinction that it's different to being the best country in the world. The goodest country in the world is the country that makes the best contribution to making the world a better place. And on that note, I'm delighted to see Ireland's ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador David Donoghue, with us, and his wife Jill Donoghue. Great to see you here, David, and indeed to give me an opportunity of congratulating you on the work that you are doing on behalf of Ireland in co-chairing the United Nations discussions, very important discussions on the Sustainable Development Goals, about which we're really, really proud. But we did succeed in restoring the country's reputation. The big element of our recovery programme, however, was employment. We reckoned that in order to recover, it was not just going to be sufficient to make budgetary changes. We also had to grow the real economy and create jobs. And there were a number of things that we did to do that. We had, in the early days of the government, we introduced a specific jobs budget. We targeted the hospitality sector. We reduced VAT on hospitality services because we knew we could get a quick win in terms of job creation in the hospitality sector, and we did. We introduced an action plan for jobs in early 2012. This was right across government, every government department, every state agency, everybody working in the one direction to maximise the number of jobs that were being created, to coordinate, to work with the private sector on expanding our exports and to encourage more foreign direct investment into the country. We also knew that it was necessary to have people ready for work, and that's why we decided to introduce specific reforms in our welfare system, so that the first day out of work was also your first day on the way back to work. And we introduced a program called Pathways to Work, which was about enabling people who were out of work to get education, to get training, to get internships, to get whatever, because we knew that in order to get a job, very often employers want to know that you have a job or have had experience of work, but to get the experience, you have to get into some employment in the first place. And fourthly, we worked with our European partners in advancing what was called, after the election of President Hollande, as the Compact for Jobs, which is something that we had been advocating for some time, and that was putting an emphasis on job creation in the European strategy, because again, around the time that the government changed in 2011, I think it's fair to say that the overwhelming emphasis in European policy at that stage was simply about, was on the fiscal side, was simply about budget changes. We needed to have a parallel strategy in Europe which was about creating jobs and creating space for growth. And we used the presidency of the European Union, which we held at the beginning of 2013, to advance that agenda, and I think it has largely worked. We then began to become a bit more ambitious. I remember making a speech at a Labour Party event in the middle of 2013, at which I argued that we needed not just to have fiscal targets that we meet, but we needed to set new targets, and that among the new targets that we needed to set was the target for full employment. There were a number of raised eyebrows, because of course with the level of unemployment that we had to talk about, full employment seemed to be fanciful. So we set the rather ambitious objective of reaching full employment by 2020, and we included that in the medium-term economic strategy that the government published at the end of 2013 as we exited the bailout. One of the things that I'm most satisfied about is that that target has now been revised, and government now believes that the target of full employment, which is getting it below, economists tell me that full employment is when it gets below 6%, that we should be able to reach that by 2018. In making the adjustments that we made, we were also conscious of the necessity to minimize the impact of those adjustments on people on low income. And among the things that we did was, first of all, we made a conscious decision that we were not going to cut basic rates of social welfare. The basic rate of social welfare for an unemployed person is 188 euros per week. And we felt that it was not right to cut that. We also decided, and again this was one of the things that we negotiated with the partners, was to increase the minimum wage. It had been reduced before we came into government, and we increased it by €1 an hour to 8.65. It's actually one of the higher levels of minimum wage in Europe. And in addition to that, we also reinstated, there were statutory wage setting mechanisms for people who are in low paid, particularly service type employment. They have been struck down by our courts. We reformed them, but we decided to reinstate them. And one of the reasons that we decided to do that was, first of all, it was necessary to do it in the interest of fairness, but also because it was important that we continued to encourage the domestic economy to recover and to increase confidence. And I think that has been reflected. It's been a struggle to get consumer confidence restored. But as you can see from this, it hit a low of 39 points. This is the index, Consumer Confidence Index, which is produced by KBC Ireland and the Economic and Social Research Institute. It hit a low 39.6 in 2009, and it has been slow enough getting it back up until we got out of the bailout. End of 2013, consumer confidence begins to improve quite significantly, and the most recent figure is 97.8%. And as I said earlier, some of that is reflected in the increased tax revenues from sales activity. The really good news, however, about where the Irish economy is at is that it is set to continue. The OECD says that after its robust rebound in 2014, the Irish economy is projected to continue to grow strongly during the next 2 years. The expansion of activity will continue to be driven by business investment and exports. The European Commission suggested that Irish GDP will grow by 3.5% in 2015, the fastest growing economy in the European Union, and by 3.6% for 2016. There are some more ambitious projections for growth. Yesterday, for example, the IMF projects that the Irish economy will grow by, the original was 3%, then they raised that to 3.5%, now they've raised it again. They now expect the Irish economy to grow by 3.9% in 2015. But at home there are even more ambitious and optimistic forecasts. IBEC, the Irish Business Organisation, at the stage I was making this preparation, they said we forecast GDP to grow by 4.8%. They've actually since revised that upwards. They're now suggesting 5.4%. And Davy Stockbrokers say that GDP will reach 2007 pre-recession peak this year, 12 months earlier than expected. Those growth forecasts, as you can see, for 2015 range from, as I said, the IMF one, which was at that stage was the lowest one. They've revised that up now to 3.9%. So as you can see, it's even the more cautious forecasts are projecting growth for 2014 of close to 4%, and in some cases higher than that. Comparing that with the rest of Europe, the growth that's projected for the Euro area 2015, 1.4%, Germany 1.7%, the United Kingdom 2.6%, the United States 3.1%. So comparatively, it is very strong growth projected for the Irish economy through 2015. And that's expected to continue through 2016. Again, 3.6%. Again, there are some forecasts that are higher than that. The Euro area 2%, Germany 2.2%, UK 2.5%, and US 3%. On the back of that growth, obviously we need to see that converted into jobs and economic activity, and our Industrial Development Authority has recently launched a new 5-year strategy which is aimed at increasing in foreign direct investment in Ireland by 40%. And it seems to me that they are tapping a rich seam, particularly in the United States, on attracting that level of foreign direct investment. The American Ireland Chamber of Commerce produced a report recently. It was prepared by Joseph P. Quinlan, who I gather is of this parish, New York University. And one of the interesting findings in that report is that in the first 9 months of 2014, foreign direct investment from United States companies to Ireland increased by 42%, and in the same period to the rest of Europe decreased by 19%. So we're doing very well in foreign direct investment. And again, that's reflected. The 2013 figures for US foreign direct investment in Ireland, 240 billion total investment, which is more than the combined US investment in France and Germany, stands at 196 billion. I think the big issue for us now in the Irish economy is to ensure that we don't take it for granted. I think that one of the tragedies of what happened late 90s into the noughties was that we had Celtic Tiger had started to roar. The economy was growing. It was export-led growth. I think that that growth and that economic progress, I think to a large extent, was taken for granted, and I think risks were taken with it, particularly in relation to what happened to property activity. So I think the big lesson from that period is that we don't make that mistake again. That the growth that we are now seeing, the growth that we expect to see over the next number of years, that we make it sustainable and that it is bedded down. And I see that there are 5 challenges that we need to address. Jobs, incomes, housing, there are some issues in relation to Europe, and there is the issue of Britain's relationship with Europe, which is a concern for us. I say jobs because we still need, while we're doing well in employment creation, we still have a distance to go. Unemployment at around 10% or slightly under, as it probably is now, is still far too high, and we have significant numbers of young people in particular who cannot, in many cases it's not just a case of getting a job, it's getting a job which matches the qualifications and the talents that they have. And we have still a lot of work to do on that, and we need to remain focused on it. The incomes issue is not just an Irish question. I think it is a question now for all developed economies. Ireland, United States, Europe, and further afield. If we say to people that the basic relationship that they have with the economy is that they work, encourage people to get jobs, we put an emphasis on getting jobs, and we say you work full time, then that work ought to be able to pay sufficiently to enable that person to earn a living. And the reality is that that is not happening in our developed economies at the moment, particularly at the lower level. We have far too many people in all of our economies who are not earning enough money to make ends meet, not earning enough money to provide themselves with a home, to raise a family, and to do all of the things that most of the people in this room would take as and I believe that this is probably the most urgent economic issue that society needs to deal with. I'm delighted to see that it is on the political agenda in the context of the current UK elections. I've been seeing over the weekend that it is going to be an issue in the and it's at many different levels. If somebody who is working full time can't earn enough to make a living, then there is an issue where the state the state provision has to be provided in terms of health, education, and so on. That has probably an increased relevance in the modern environment, where we expect people to take up employment which is no longer a job for life, and where they don't have the security that goes with a job for life, but where we expect people, because of the demands of the modern globalized economy that we all live and operate in, that you have to be flexible, that you have to move job and so on. There is a requirement now to put around people at work a framework of security which enables them to provide for themselves. There is also the issue of the scandal of the gap in incomes that there are. It is not, I mean, at one stage it was quite normal, not unreasonable, that the chief executive of a company was paid maybe 5 or 6 times what the lowest paid employee in that company was earning. Now it's a factor in some cases of 200-300 times what the lowest paid employee. That's not sustainable. And neither is it sustainable that in many parts of the world that people are earning levels of income that are insufficient for them to meet their very basic needs. And when we think about issues like terrorism, and when we think about issues of many of the threats that are to our societies at the moment, they have their roots, in my view, in that insecurity and inequality in incomes, and it has to be addressed. The third area that I see as an issue is in the area, in the Irish context, is in the area of housing provision. This is the graph of what has happened to house prices in Dublin over the period 2005. This is the index that is used by the Irish Department of Environment and Local Government. Base 100 in 2005, you can see where it peaked in 2007 around almost 140, and then as the recession hit in, house prices dropped to around, the index was around 60, and then again around the time of our exit from the bailout towards the end of 2013 began to recover again up to, I think it was 80, the mid-80s in 2014. Had begun to ease back a bit at the beginning of 2015, but I think that is probably due to the new restrictions on mortgages that the central bank has introduced. But again, you're seeing a recovery in property price, an increase in house prices, particularly in Dublin. The biggest problem, however, I think that we have is in construction activity. You know, I think we're at the other end of the pendulum now on the problem. At peak, Ireland was producing over 90,000 housing units per year at a time when the real demand or real need for housing was probably about half that. And then it slumped during the recession down to 8,000 was the lowest, and it's you know just struggling around the 10,000 output level. Demographic need is for about 25,000. I think it's probably I think the real need is probably higher than that, because I think there's some pent-up demand from previous years. But we have a problem in construction because, of course, the construction industry largely collapsed, particularly on the residential side. Construction companies are concerned about the risks that they take in big projects and are slow to get into it. And of course, there's issues relating to credit as well. Now, government has recognised this. They produced a construction strategy last year. The new Minister for the Environment, Alan Kelly, announced a public housing programme some months ago, 1.5 billion. It's the largest public housing programme in Ireland since the mid-1980s. So it is being addressed, but it is an issue that we are going to have to think about. The other issue that we need to look at is what's happening in Europe. Now, again, I think the rumours of Europe's decline, I think, to be fair, I think are greatly exaggerated. The European Union is still biggest economy, biggest consumer market, biggest source of foreign direct investment. Rate of growth, which has returned in Europe, is less than what is the case in Ireland, but there is growth. The biggest problem, however, is that it is very, very uneven. There's the issue of Greece. Some measures have been taken in Europe which I think will help. I think the initiatives that are being taken by the European Commission and the work that President Jean-Claude Juncker is doing in putting together a stronger economic profile for the European Union, the decisions of the European Central Bank on bond buying and our quantitative easing strategy, which I was glad to see President Draghi confirming yesterday that he intends to continue. That will certainly help growth in Europe. But it is fair to say, I think, that the European Union itself, I think, became very inward-looking during the period of the recession. And I think there is a need for the European Union to recover its sense of purpose and its sense of direction, and in particular to recover that kind of principle of solidarity, which was at the root of the European project. Europe also, I think, increasingly, has to look at risks outside its borders. There's issues in North Africa, the aftermath of the Arab Spring, Middle East, Syria, and more recently Ukraine. And I think increasingly Europe's work, and perhaps it may well be the key to Europe recovering a degree of self-confidence and recovering its sense of purpose, will be the work that it is doing outside its borders and helping to resolve some of these issues. An issue which is of immediate concern to us in Ireland is the prospect that Britain might exit, or at very least retreat somewhat in its membership of the European Union. That would be a major concern for us. We joined the European Union at the same time as Britain. We want to see the UK remaining in the European Union and remaining an active member of the European Union. But I also think we have to be realistic. Who knows where what the consequences of the current election in the UK will be, both for Britain's position within the European Union, and I think also probably for Scotland's position within the United Kingdom. And we need to be thinking about what happens if there are developments on that front. And frankly, I think we need to, while we want to see the UK remaining within the European Union, I think we have to be thinking in terms of, the opportunities that might present if we found ourselves as the only English-speaking member of the European Union. There are a number of longer-term issues. I'm conscious of the clock. A number of longer-term issues I think that we also need to think about. Irish population. We're the only country, I think, in the developed world with a population which is less today than it was in the middle of the 19th century. We know why that is. One of the positive outcomes of it was, of course, the enormous diaspora that some of whom are here, and which we rely on. But Irish population is growing again. It's population of the state, 4.6 million at the moment. Population of Northern Ireland, 1.8 million. The Central Statistics Office are projecting that by 2036, their lowest projection for growth in the state's population is about 5 million, just under 5 million, and on the high side, they're projecting just under 6 million. Assuming that there is similar growth in the population in Northern Ireland, and no reason to think that there won't be, then within the next 2 decades, the Irish population will have surpassed the level of population that it had at the time of the Great Famine. And there are huge implications in that for the domestic economy, for infrastructure development, and so on. It could be faster than that. One of the things that we're seeing in foreign direct investment is the ability of companies investing in Ireland, particularly in Dublin, to attract labour from overseas. I think in that context also, I think there are issues, we were talking about it just informally with a few people before we started, there are issues I think about, and again depending on what happens in Britain, both in relation to Europe and in relation to Scotland, I think the question of the need for us to seriously address the all-island economy, a north-south economy in a serious way, I think is back on the agenda. It was a great event a couple of weeks ago in Armagh to celebrate the life and work of Seamus Mallon. And he made a wonderful speech at the end of the dinner, where he reminded us that the Good Friday Agreement will soon be almost 20 years old, that the Good Friday Agreement does talk about the reunification of the country, but that it requires persuasion, and that he challenged us all. Where are the persuaders? And I think the time has come for persuaders. I think the time has come for us to talk now about the advantages of looking at the whole island from an economic perspective, the opportunities that there are, the fact that the necessity to look at the whole island economy may be on our agenda sooner than we had expected because of developments in Britain, and I think that there is a job of work to be done, persuasion, and I don't mean persuasion of Northern Protestants and Unionists. I mean persuasion also of Southern partitionists, of whom there are more than perhaps we care to admit. But it is, I think, something for the future. I want to thank you again, Loretta, for the opportunity of speaking here. I look forward to the question and answer session. Thank you very much indeed.
May want to sit over there so you can see. Professor Nicholas Economides will now pick up where Eamon very interestingly has brought us. Nick.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm afraid the story that I'm going to say is not as is far away from the cheerful story that and but it is true. So let me see if I can handle this. Okay. So this is the summary of the story. It's simple. There's some euros down there. The Greek piggy bank has been emptied. And this is another way to see the story. This is an ancient god of the sea, Poseidon, looking over the storm behind him. Okay, so the issues. In this crisis, we had a number of states that were involved, not only just Ireland, but of course Portugal, Spain, Cyprus, and Greece. And Greece was, in fact, in the worst shape than all the other countries when the crisis started. It had a very large budget deficit, over 15%, a very large debt as a percentage of GDP, very large state sector with about 800,000 employees in a country of only 11 million, and a lack of competitiveness, not only in the state sector, but also in parts of the private sector. So the EU intervened as follows. First of all, it made a plan through which Greece reduced the deficit. And in fact, by 2014, the deficit had been eliminated. Greece has presently, or it had until the present government, a balanced budget at the end of 14. So it increased taxes, it reduced spending. The objective of the program was to increase the competitiveness of the private markets, of the private sector, by opening markets to competition, and other measures that have been called structural reforms, and I can be more specific in a minute. It recapitalized the banks. The Greek banks did not have the same problems as the Irish banks. They were in pretty good shape as far as their private loans, but they had bought a lot of Greek debt, which was restructured, and then they needed extra capital, which came from the European Union loans. And additionally, something unique among the countries of the programs, there was what they called euphemistically the private sector involvement, or PSI, which is another way to say that the bondholders got only 25 cents on the dollar. There was a big haircut of the bonds held by the private sector. Okay. The program countries were lent at a very low interest rate. The Greek interest rate on the average is 1.82%, it's extremely low. The banks were rescued with about 50 billion from the European Union, but the way it was done was peculiar. Instead of the banks getting the money directly, the state of Greece got the money and then Greece gave it to the banks. That was, in my opinion, not right. It gave primacy to the state, and it gave the ability of the state to control the banks completely. Additionally, one of the problems that arose in the crisis was that the European Union was not ready, did not have the institutions ready to deal with the crisis. And it dealt with it as the crisis became more and more intense as it went to different countries. So each one of these countries got a different deal. And the one that was the worst deal, in fact, was Cyprus, was the last one. Part of the problem was how to deal with the banks. In the end, the way that the present rules of the European Union reduce the quality of EU banks compared to US banks, because they don't cover completely to the extent that the US banks cover the deposits of individuals. The US covers at 250,000 per person per bank, while the EU covers 100,000 euros for all the banks combined. That doesn't really affect the countries that are in good shape, But in a country like Cyprus, for example, it's a disaster because it brings the quality of the banking down. So as I said before, there was a haircut. This is a good picture. I mean, people don't usually understand what a haircut means in bonds. But this is actually the best picture would be if this guy had a big afro style, long hair before, and then after 74% he's down here, where he is. Okay, so the private bondholders lost about 100 billion because of this haircut. Part of this money was lost by Greek pension funds and Greek banks. So there is a lot of pain inside Greece because of that as well. But nevertheless, after 4 years of the program, in the spring of 14, things look pretty good. As we already heard, Ireland had already recovered, left the program. Portugal was very close to leaving the program. And the Greece that started with a 15% deficit in 2014 had a primary surplus, that is a government surplus if you disregard the interest that it pays on its loans. And it was growing well, and 2 years after its bankruptcy and the haircut that we discussed a minute ago, in April, May 14, it managed to issue bonds and managed to sell them at 3-year bonds at 3.5%, 4-year bonds at, 5-year bonds at 4.5%. These are, in my opinion, that was a great success of the program, that 2 years after the bankruptcy, the country can go to the people that lost 75% of their money and sell them bonds at reasonable rates. But the most important thing, and maybe that doesn't show so much in the numbers, is that unemployment and recession problems remain. Unemployment in Greece in 14 was about 25%, and youth unemployment much higher. And additionally, the shrinking of the economy that was necessary to make the balanced budget created a recession that over time people had lost about 25 to 30% of their income. So people are very upset. And because people were that upset, the political situation deteriorated. There was an obscure left-wing party with 4% market share, and over time, the civil servants moved from traditional parties to that party, and people who are upset about how things were going moved to that party, and that party became the first party in European and local elections in May 14. At the same time, the government, the Samaras government, that was the previous conservative center-left, center-right coalition government, was trying to finish the program. But the IMF wanted a big success to finish the program. They asked for more stuff than this government could ever deliver, especially with the prospect of elections coming up. So the government couldn't deliver that, the previous coalition. And the Syriza government, the left government, promised reversal of all reforms and privatizations, increasing the state sector, increasing wages and pensions, including re-establishing the 13th salary. Maybe you don't know, but in Greece people get paid the 13th salary. Or they used to be paid, then in part of the reform it was abolished, and the Syriza comes up and says, well, we're going to give it back to you. But the 13th salary is not something trivial. It's 8%, if you think about it, of the budget. So it's not something trivial that you can say, I'm going to give you like that. Anyway, pretty soon after Syriza did well in May 14 elections, Greece was excluded from the money markets again. You could see the 10-year interest rate, the interest rate on 10-year bonds. In May, it was something like 5%. By December, it was 9+%, almost 10%. Finally, in the end of January, Syriza gets elected, and the situation is much more dire now than it has been for a number of years. And these are kind of bullet points. I'm going to go through it in the next few slides. Greece has a money crunch, banks are squeezed, The old program needed to be renewed. The Europeans asked for more reform, and Syriza wants to go back. So the most important point as we speak today, and you will see it in the headlines of the financial newspapers, is that Greece is in a money crunch. What has happened is that with the prospect of the left being elected, people didn't pay taxes because they thought, well, maybe we don't have to. Maybe they're going to be postponed. Maybe we can have installments. But in any case, maybe there is a possibility, so we're not going to pay. So they didn't. Greece cannot borrow money from the financial markets, and it won't be able to borrow from the EU and the IMF without proceeding with reforms. And the state is very close to running out of money. Here, let me give you an idea. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the loan obligations of Greece. And let me explain what I mean here. These lines, IMF, 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 these are direct loans to the IMF. The other lines, which are, there are three, the treasury bill holders amounts, these are issues of the Greek government of 3- and 6-month T-bills. Now, these originally included some that were bought by foreign banks, about 25% of them. And that's what I call on the right the net obligation. Why? Because when it comes down for this to be re-auctioned or refinanced, the European Central Bank has forbidden Greek banks to buy more than what they have. Which means that whatever the foreign banks, and the foreign banks are not going to buy now because the situation is so uncertain. So which means that 25% that used to be held by foreign banks now has to be held by the Greek state. So these are the numbers of the net obligation. For example, the first number here, that was today, 250 million. But if you add these numbers, and you can see the running total going to the middle of June, is 4.6 billion. That's a very large number for the Greek economy, and completely beyond the ability of the Greek state to actually pay without getting a new loan from outside. So it's running out of money. The Greek banks have bought about 15 billion of these T-bills. The ECB will not allow them to buy more. The government wants to push the ECB to do that. They play what I call a chicken game. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of a chicken game. I mean, a game in which Greece is almost sure is going to lose because there is not too much it can bluff on because everybody knows all the cards. and the other guys are much bigger than Greece. I mean, so really, it's very, very hard to win in this game. So what does the government do to be able to elongate its existence? It took money from pension funds, whatever cash the pension funds had, and agricultural subsidy money that was hanging around until harvest. They took it and gave it to the Bank of Greece so that they can borrow a few more. But as you can imagine, I mean, that only gives you a few more days, maybe a few more weeks. It doesn't really solve the problem. The real problem is going to be solved only with an agreement between the government and the creditors. Additionally, the Greek banks are squeezed because the tremendous political uncertainty has made people withdraw a significant part of their deposits. So people estimate that 30 to 35 billion has been withdrawn from about 160 in the last 3 to 4 months. So that has put the banks in a very hard position because their assets are disappearing. So they get emergency liquidity, that is cash, from the ECB. So they have managed to get about 108, 60 plus 48 emergency liquidity assistance from the ECB. And of course, the ECB says, we provide liquidity to you as long as you are in the euro and you are in the program, you are in this agreement that we have. Otherwise, you will not be able to get that. So what do we really need to do in Greece? We need to do a lot of stuff that has happened in Ireland, and of course some of them are very peculiar to Greece. Greece doesn't have private universities. It's probably the only country in the world that does it. It's written in the constitution. There are no private universities. I mean, I don't see what's wrong with having NYU in Greece, but they do. I mean, the population does. At some point in time it did. So we need to change that. We need to open the so-called closed professions, like transportation, trucks, need special licenses to exist, that these licenses are privately held and exchanged, and they're very expensive. So we need to abolish that. We need to shrink the state. The state is way too big. I already told you, 800,000 people for an 11 million population country. We need to simplify the state procedures for starting and running private businesses. We definitely need to cut the tax rates. One of the things that Ireland did very well. The tax rates are extremely high in Greece, and they don't attract business. Greek businesses find ways to go to Bulgaria, where the tax rate is only 15%, and move over there and get renamed and so on. Greece needs to reform the tax collection mechanism. There's a tremendous amount of corruption in that mechanism, and the amount of taxes that the state manages to collect is just a fraction of what they're supposed to collect. Another problem is that even in the cases where Greece is successful and prosecutes successfully the tax evaders, it takes many years. It takes them 6-7 years to get a decision in that. And we need to have courts that work quickly, hopefully in 6 months. And in my opinion, it would be a good idea for new businesses to have a zero tax period for a few years. And of course, Greece needs to go forward with privatizations that were part of the program. The objective, in my opinion, should be to reduce unemployment to 15% in 2 years. I think that's a good objective to have in mind, and any finance minister should try it. And one way to do that might be to get an exemption from the program. The program is called mnemonio in Greek. To get an exemption from the program on public investment, so that public investment can be done outside the restrictions of the austerity program, so that more jobs get created. And I don't mean to subsidize people and give them fake work. I mean real work in which there is an investment and it attracts workers. And the sectors, of course, that would be good for that, for Greece, would be tourism, renewable energy, general infrastructure, specialized architecture, and export industries. Okay, so unfortunately, the bad news is that 4 years of very hard work for Greece, and when the program almost finished, and it was very close to finishing in the middle of 14, have been lost. And they were lost quickly. They were lost in the last 3 months. And how bad things are, in my opinion, is indicative of this statistic. The Greek government bond that was issued, this is a 3-year bond, that was issued in April 14 at 3.5%. Yesterday, or today, was trading at 27%, the secondary market for these bonds. People were trying to get rid of them, right? So that's why they're trading at this huge interest rate. And if you make the calculations, this implies a probability of bankruptcy of Greece in the euro, or an exit from the euro, of about 45%. So as we get to the end of April, and the government has to decide if it's going to meet its foreign obligations, or if it's going to not pay the local workers, the pensioners and so on. And that's a hard decision. I think that this particular government, being from who they are, they're not going to pay the foreign obligations. They're going to pay the local ones. That will create a bankruptcy, or what's called a credit event in more technical terms. That would be a bankruptcy within the euro. And by now, I'm pretty confident that the European partners want this bankruptcy to happen within the euro. they're not going to try to push Greece to leave. But it's possible that the politicians in Greece, the ones in power, might prefer to go out of the euro. I hope not, because out of the euro is going to be much worse for Greece. And it won't really have such huge effects on the rest of Europe, but it will be a disaster for Greece. So that's where we're heading right now. I do hope that even at the last minute, the government will make a U-turn on its promises. Its promises were exactly the opposite of this program. Make a U-turn on its promise and do the responsible thing and say, look, I mean, we really need to do that. We really need to adhere to the program, get the money at a very low interest rate, and recover. And that will be the best thing for Greece. But I cannot really guarantee that, so we really have to think of the alternatives. And I'm afraid the most likely alternative would be a bankruptcy within the euro, and a less likely alternative, and even much worse, would be an exit from the euro for Greece. So that's it. I mean, Greece is a beautiful country. You can go there for vacation. Hopefully, still in the euro when you go there in the summer. Thank you very much.